The AOC Agon AGM700 mouse features the Pixart 3389 sensor, which is deemed as many as a flawless gaming sensor. Now in this review we're going to see if it's actually worth its price tag, because in the UK it can be found for around £40, whilst in the US it can be found for roughly $40. So to put it through its paces, I launched on some Call of Duty and played some Modern Warfare multiplayer and had no issues whatsoever when it came to the Pixart sensor. Indeed, the 3389 sensor provides fantastic one-to-one tracking and had no problems whatsoever when it came to swiping left and right. I can safely say, subjectively, that my gaming performance wasn't affected by the mouse. Similarly, when it came to the overall clicking feel, in other words the left and right buttons, here they're Omron switches that are rated for 50 million clicks, so there's no problem here when it comes to longevity or indeed the overall accuracy. I had no problems when it comes to, let's say, a kind of wet finger approach, which basically means that if your finger is sticking to the left and right buttons, this wasn't the case because of the overall design and the build quality of the mouse, and it meant that yet again my gaming performance was untainted. It can safely be said that the overall performance of the mouse is flawless. Now, while its sensor and indeed switches are absolutely faultless, there is a few problems that I do want to highlight. And first off, let's talk about the button placement. Now at the top, AOC have integrated two top buttons, which are definitely appreciated. Alongside the left, right and indeed the middle click button, they're all very much great to see. However, on the side you have got two side buttons which have no issues over here, but then it's the button that's found by where your thumb would rest. Now, you can disable this button through the software, which I'll showcase shortly. However, when it came to actually using it, I found myself that my grip style was changing from a fingertip or palm tip type of grip to a kind of claw grip type. And that's because my thumb didn't like being rested on a button. Even though there was nothing being pressed over here, I just felt a little bit odd, specifically when I was playing fast-paced games such as, let's say, Call of Duty. Now, I do find that this can be quite subjective, so I'm not going to really dwell on it all too much, but it's something that I did find a little bit odd, specifically in comparison to other mices out there on the market. This one will either take some getting used to and or will be hated and or loved by certain individuals, really depending on the way that you actually grip your mouse. Now, very much on the overall feel of the mouse, it should be mentioned that the cable is 1.8 meters long, it's non-detachable, and it's got a pretty thick braiding. Now, the thick braiding means that it does suffer from sorts of kinking. I've noticed this in the past with the likes of, let's say, the Logitech G502, and it's something that I haven't been a fan of, specifically when it comes to longevity. Elsewhere, it doesn't feel as sleek as the likes of, for example, the Roccat Kain 120 Aimo, which offers a much thinner braid sort of cable, and therefore means that, well, it will form a much better bond between you and the table and the computer a lot faster. I never thought I would say bond and mouse in one sentence, but anyway, all I'm trying to say over here is that I wish that the cable was built slightly better and or been a little bit more refined. Now, moving swiftly on, I should mention that the overall weight of the mouse is 148 grams, and there's 5 times 5 gram weights that can be added to the underneath of the mouse. Now, it's very easy to add them in. However, when it comes to taking them out, you really do have to bang them against your hand or, let's say, a hard surface in order for them to come out quite easily. And so with all of that out of the way, let's get on to a sound demo. So hopefully that sound demo was useful for you guys, but there are certain things I do want to point out that potentially my microphones didn't quite pick up. First of all, the side buttons do have a slight ping back type of sound, well, that really depends as to how you're actually going to be pressing them or indeed releasing them. And elsewhere, the scroll wheel does feel a little bit cheap in comparison to some of its competitors out there, which also have a similar sort of clicky feel. Here, the AOC one just didn't feel as premium, at least not that what I would say subjectively. But on the plus side, there's no issues when it comes to rattling. The clicks feel perfectly great when the right and left, that is, with the Omron switches, and there's also no sort of sticky finger approach, which I did mention before. So therefore, if you're going to be lifting up from an odd angle on your left and right buttons, then you're not going to have a slight odd spring back type of sound. And now we get onto the software, and as you can see over here, you've got 8 buttons that you can customize. The ones most people will probably customize is 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8, which are the side and top buttons. As you can see over here, I've got kind of a Counter-Strike configuration, but of course you can customize it to your heart's content pretty much, and you can even add a macro if you want to have that on a singular button press, so that's pretty good. And of course you can disable it, so as I mentioned before, the 8 button over here, I had it completely disabled, so if that's not something you're going to use, well, you don't have to. What I do like over here is the fact that not only have you got 3 separate modes per profile, but you've got 5 profiles to choose from. There's a lot of customization at your fingertips, which is pretty insane. Now, as for sensitivity, you've got the DPI settings, and it's nice to see over here you have got 50 DPI increments, which start from 200 DPI all up to 16,000 DPI. So for example, I'm at 1,400, I can go to 1,450, and it's good to see you've got 5 different DPI levels that you can select, or indeed if you don't want to have them enabled, you can disable them. There's also smart DPI, although I didn't use that, it just seemed to muddle around with the overall DPI once you are moving. Now, polling rate is pretty self-explanatory, so is double click, Windows pointer speed, and scroll speed. Very normal, as you would find with most mice out there. And as for calibration, it is to do with the mouse mat. It's pretty self-explanatory on how to do it, and it's just a useful tool to have. Now, as for lighting effects, given the mouse only has 2 LED zones, it can't have, let's say, a wave function like you'd have on a keyboard, and therefore you're limited to static, breathing, and blink. I think most people will probably choose breathing or completely have it disabled. Now, for the single LED, you can have 2 separate zones. So for example, the side light versus the main light, they can be customized independently. So therefore, if you want a different color, you can have that and then have a single LED zone. Moving on from there, you do have the pulsation and the brightness. It's worth bearing in mind here, the pulsation only has 3 modes, so slow, medium, and fast, while the brightness have 4 separate increment levels that you can choose from. So that's pretty useful. Now, as for light FX sync, this is useful for you if you have other AOC peripherals, although it's worth bearing in mind that let's say if you have the keyboard, which has like a wave function in terms of LED lights, then you can't have that on your mouse, and therefore it will default to what your mouse is capable of. And in this case, let's say if it's breathing, your keyboard would default to the breathing pattern. So I'm not sure how useful the FX sync will be for most consumers. However, it is there for you to use, and you don't have to use it if you don't wish to. And so this brings me on to my verdict. Will I recommend the AGM700 mouse? Well, frankly, I really do love what AOC have tried to achieve over here, specifically when it comes to the overall performance. Well, there's no issues whatsoever. However, subjectively, the placement of the side button and the braided cable are definitely not appreciated. Specifically in comparison to other mice you can find out there on the market, I feel the AGM700 could have just been a little bit more refined and or positioned in a slightly different way. So as a result, I would definitely suggest looking at the alternatives. They'll be down in the description below, but of course there might be some that I might have not reviewed or tried, so do let me know in the comments section below if there's other ones that you would suggest instead. Now, if you've liked this detailed review, definitely do drop a like, and of course subscribe if you haven't already, and hit that bell notification, all of which would be greatly appreciated. I've been Totally Dubbed, and I'll hopefully see you in the next one. Take care, and goodbye.